Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Construction Job Site Management. Today we're going to continue our discussions on documentation and record keeping at the job site. So we've been looking at things like submittal logs, mock-ups, the preparation of documents, and we're going to continue on that track. So this lecture is broken up into two parts, lecture 4A and 4B. And in 4B, we'll actually get into a little bit of discussions about conducting meetings on the job site. So I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. So some of the objectives, reasons why we keep accurate records, some of the types of record keeping that we do, and what our goals are, like why are we bothering with all this trouble, so that we keep a track of the appropriate documentation, right? You could collect every piece of information, every item ever printed or done, but it's not much use if it's not pertinent to us, or it doesn't protect us, or it's not useful for us. Then you're kind of just spinning your wheels collecting all this data and not doing anything with it. So we definitely want to collect the right data and have the right documentation so that we're in a good position to plan and effectively manage our projects. So some of the aspects of job site documentation and communication is objectivity and truthfulness. Your textbook will go into some information on that. But really what you're trying to do is collect things that represent what's happening. It does you no good to start falsifying and changing things to sort of change the perspective, because at some point things will come to light. You want to make sure that you've represented yourself in a very professional way, a very ethical way, and that will go a long way to building trust with your clients and with everybody that you interact with. Timeliness too. You know, the best time to collect documentation is as it's occurring, right? In legal terms, we call that the contemporaneous documentation. So the documentation as the project is being built. To fabricate documentation, even if you're trying to be truthful, later on it becomes more problematic because you can't remember things as clearly as when the things are happening. And from a legal perspective, contemporaneous documentation is given the highest validity. Plus, from a management perspective, if there's an issue with something, you want to get it on it right now. You don't want to get on it after it happened 2 months later. How easy it is to get a hold of. I think that first image on the first slide with all the pile of papers and file folders and stuff, yeah, very old school thinking. What you want to do is be able to retrieve it really fast. And that's where a lot of the productivity tools come in. And I'll mention some of that towards the end of lecture 4B. But retrievability, how easy can we access it? How easy can the subtrades access it? You know, should they be accessing it? So these are questions that we want to look at. Appropriate distribution. Well, that's the other thing. You know, you can CC everybody under the sun in an email, and then after a while, they don't pay any attention. Even if you send an important email directly to them, if you've been CCing them on 100 other documents, you just think in your head, oh, it's just such and such. They're CCing me on something. Very important to distribute to the right people, but not necessarily all the people. And I think we make that kind of mistake a little bit, over informing people, because then they stop paying attention because they're overwhelmed if they actually had to read all the documents. Standard uniform information. If I'm a company, if I can standardize things, that builds into my systems, that builds into my processes. So we've talked about goals and we talked about processes and systems. These are things that we can make life easier just by having systems in place and processes in place, so people don't have to think, oh, what do I got to do for this? It's just a process, it's a system, it's a habit, it's a routine. And is it complete and comprehensive? Is there enough information there to be useful? You know, if there's not enough there, it might not be useful. So some of the things that, areas that we cover, you know, events that are occurring, conversations, meetings, costs, correspondence, contractual requirements. You know, these are just some of the areas of things that we want to document what goes on so that we can have a record of it, especially if people are making commitments to certain things, so that then it's on record. So event and conversation documentation, what occurred on the document on the job site, the actual sequence of the project, the personnel, materials delivered to the job site, the equipment used. If we're tracking that, that can be very, very helpful. It can be helpful for data for future projects so that we have an idea, what sequencing works best, what requirements we need. It can be helpful to match up against a bill. So if we're looking at equipment and we were renting equipment, if we know when it arrived and when it left, and then when we get the invoice, if there's a discrepancy, we could always review that information. So they're charging us 2 weeks for this front end loader or Bobcat, and we only had it 1 week. So we go back to our records, we double check, we verify, and then we can have a discussion about the error in the invoice. So those are types of and reasons why we would want to do that. Daily reports, that gives us a snapshot of the activities and conditions. There's lots of different formats to this. A lot of the productivity software will use that, the different ones like Bluebeam and FieldWire that I list at the end of B, Procore. So they have standard formats, but even those formats you can make adjustments to as a company. So there's that flexibility in there. But whatever the format, it should definitely have the date. And if it's a productivity software, it'll do the date for you. Project name, project number, report preparer, so who did the report, weather information and activities in progress. So you're keeping, that the winds were such and such. And you can always go to Environment Canada and you can get records of what the data is. Labor and subcontractors on the site, who's there. So it's keeping track of them. And sometimes you never know what these things lead to. Somebody says, well, where's my husband? Where's my wife? She came to the job and left and we've never seen them again, right? What happened to them? Well, you would know if they came and you'd have a record of that, right? So that can be helpful too in those tracking instances, because sometimes safety requirements, something could have happened. Somebody could have fell in a form or something like that. Labor subcontractors, equipment, materials, I already mentioned that. Visitors is important when that's why usually when you go to a construction project, the first thing they do is they make you sign in and then they make you sign out. They want to know that you came and then that you signed out when you left. So those are some examples. There's a daily report sort of example there, and you can sort of see it. And here's one that's filled out. This is in your book example. So, how many carpenters were there, how many laborers were there, how many iron workers were there. This can be helpful in tracking costs. This can be helpful in looking if you're doing resource loading on schedules. This can be helpful for feedback to your estimating department. If it's your own forces that are doing the work, you want to be tracking, if it's your own forces, you want to be tracking not only the workers that are there, but the work that they're doing, and you assign cost codes to that, and that way you can monitor what you budgeted and what things actually cost. And then that's helpful feedback for that project to see, well, why is things going slower than we expected? Or for future projects, why did we estimate this way? Weekly and monthly reports. Very often companies may internally do weekly reports, but externally do monthly reports. Sometimes it could be weekly, sometimes it can be bi-weekly. Sometimes you have to look at what does the contract discuss about this. If it's weekly reports, then that's what you got to do. If it's monthly reports are very, very common in the Canadian construction industry. A client update, a schedule narrative that provides information and details about how the project is going is very, very common. This is kind of sort of a high-level weekly report that just sort of would touch on the major elements of things with summary of the activities, the work that's going on, the schedule, how is the time, remember, cost, time, quality type things, schedule, cost, the subcontractors that are working on the site and how the work is going, change orders, and if there's any new change orders that's coming on the project, and how that may or may not impact the project work. So that would be sort of a weekly one. The next one's kind of a monthly one. Same idea, just monthly, sort of very high level, not too detailed. I think the next one is a sample for progress schedules and schedule updates. So on a project, this is another form of documentation we have the project schedule. And we discussed this a little bit more in a later lecture, and you're going to have a whole course on that in January, which is project management, planning and scheduling. I've written a whole book on this particular area because it's one of the most important areas in construction, at least in my mind. And so you develop a schedule, that's the plan. And then you update the schedule to see how you are matching against the plan. And if you start to go a little bit out, you want to know, why are you going out? Is it something you caused? Is it something the client caused? This gets into another whole area called delay analysis. But more importantly, if you're starting to go out, you want to replan the work so you can get yourself back on track and you can fix the schedule. So that's also, I always find that kind of an exciting part of the whole construction process, when things seem to go off the rails, and getting them back on the rails and back on track and back in the direction that you want to go. It's real satisfaction when you're problem solving, figure things out, and you see how something deviates and how you're able to get it back on track. And that's project management. No plan survives the project. No initial plan survives the project. So plans are nothing. Planning is everything, right? This famous saying by Eisenhower, who was the general who oversaw the Allied forces in Europe during World War II. Because he knew, we have this plan, we have this strategy, and then things change. On the ground, things change. In the air, things change. In the ocean, things change. So then you have to do tactical maneuvers to get yourself back on track, because your strategy is heading towards a goal. And we talked about SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. Got to be committed towards that, but you are going to hit deviations. So a progress schedule helps you to monitor that and manage that. And contractually, you provide that when you're submitting your bids. And during the project, before it starts, you develop a plan called a baseline schedule. And then you update the plan as the project goes, and it changes. And the most current changes are the current master schedule for the project, the new plan of how you intend to go forward. So this is a template that I have on schedule narrative, and you list out the company's names, you give a project name to it. You want to make sure you're clear on from what update period to what update period. If you visit my website, not my website, my YouTube channel, you will see that I have in Microsoft Project a methodology for naming and protocols, file naming protocols for your updates. So if it's a 24-month project, this would be update number 24 if you're doing monthly updates. Very simple, easy to follow. And that way you can orchestrate them in order, because this is showing you step by step, month by month, how the project was built. They call this the contemporaneous schedule. This is the as-built schedule for how the project was built. So you can go through the monthly updates, and you can more or less see the pluses and the minuses and all the interferences and how these impacted your project, which is very, very helpful in project management. So you also want to identify things like the major works that's been started since the last month and completed, number of work days impacted by bad weather. You want to track that. If you're on a liquidated damages contract, there's a good likelihood that weather conditions, if you had a weather calendar, if it's severe enough, you can get an extension for that time. So by a weather calendar, I mean, usually when you start a project, you put an allowance for bad weather. That would be representative of the area you're working in. So like St. John's, Newfoundland might have 60 days a year for bad weather. Toronto might have 35 days a year for bad weather. Fort McMurray, Alberta might have 45 days for bad weather. So you would track that. And let's say in a year you had, it's Toronto, let's say it's 35 days. In a year, maybe you have 40 days of bad weather. Well, if you tracked it, well, then that means you should be able to get an extension of 5 days and not have to pay liquidated damages. So that's important, that information, and for you to track that. Schedule impacts, what it caused the schedule impacts. You want to have that, and then you're saying it as it happens. So you're much more accurate with that information. Within that month, you're going to remember what happened in much more detail. Within the weeks, as you do your weekly updates. If you do lean construction, within the days, as you do daily huddles. So there's this hierarchy in schedules that we look at. And of course, impacts of deletions, delays, any major changes made to the project schedule, your changes, added, deleted activities, and then you clearly, it should show how much you're behind schedule, how much you're ahead of schedule. So variance, it should be very clear. I shouldn't read this document and say, I wonder if we're on time or behind time. The client shouldn't read it. It should be very clear. And then depending on your contract documents, you may have to provide appendices that helps to explain that. And for sure, they're going to want a printout of the schedule, or if it were me, I'd want a digital file of the schedule, because then I can really dig into it. I'm not big on just printed schedules. I want to see the actual schedule that I can actually look at what's going on and flip between different screens, because there's a lot of really good data when you get into understanding how schedules work. So I'm just talking about like a schedule, something like this, so up above here. And you know, this particular one's cost loaded, where costs have been associated with the activities. I can see if we're ahead or behind schedule. In this case, we're 9 days behind schedule. So the bottom bar here represents the baseline, the original schedule, and the top bar represents where we are now. So we're obviously behind. So this is behind 9 working days. Does not count weekends, so 9 working days. And so we could go back and we could track this, and then we could figure out where the biggest losses, where they actually occurred, was actually up in the beginning, right? So we had a 10-day loss here. Somewhere we gained back a day, right? So we can sort of look at that. We can follow it through on the schedule and understand what's going on. And that gives us good information. So the question is, well, why was this 10 days? Were we 10 days behind in submitting the application, or were we 10 days behind in getting the approval, right? So we'd want to look at that. And then we discuss it and figure it out. If it's our fault, then it's our fault. If it's a third party, then again, we might have a good avenue for an extension. Look at the contract, look at what the documentation says, and then take the best approach to solve and resolve the issue. Understand where your client's coming from. If they're time-oriented, try to work out a workaround so that will appease them. Diaries and journals, personal records of conversations, occurrences, kept by management on the job site. It can be, again, in the productivity software. The advantage of that is if you write it in a journal like I keep, so I always keep a journal. But if you keep it in a journal, journals get lost. Like if you're looking at containing and keeping all the documentation, people leave the company, right? All that information goes with them. So by having it documented into a system, it's captured and it's not going to disappear on you. So that's usually the advantages, as opposed to like this one, it says bound so that pages cannot be, that would be a bound journal typically that you would use. As a corporate policy, I would be going with productivity software. Kept on the job site logs, again, telephone log, who was called, visitors log, the sign in, sign out, subcontractor, who came, who went out, document control log, that would be like the submittal log that we showed you last week in those lectures, right? And procurement schedule, that log there, so we can track, you know, what the expected dates are, what the actual dates are. Accident reports, you have to really have a good understanding of WSIB requirements and reporting requirements under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. And progress photographs. There's no excuse for not taking lots of photographs. And again, with the productivity software that's being used, you can upload your photos instantaneously, like Instagram, and then it's in the system. It's date stamped as to when it happened, and that's really helpful. So if there's a discrepancy with the schedule and the client's not buying your time frames, you would have that photo log that would back up to say, no, we poured the concrete for that slab on this date. There's the pictures of the truck doing it. There's the pictures of the slab going in. They're date stamped. Voila. Really good documentation and evidence. Not that things can't be manipulated digitally, don't get me wrong, but that's a good start. Video recordings, that too, and we all know video cameras are everywhere that we can see. When I've done training with a lot of various companies, it's always fun for me because at lunchtime there's usually one of the site supers or the PM and come over. See, look, we got this port. Look, this guy's too close to the edge, and he picks up the phone. Get that concrete truck away from the edge. It's too close to the edge. Get them another 6 feet over. And he's watching what's going on the site. They got a high mounted camera. He can see everything. Great, great. So in our digital world, we've got to take advantage of these things where we can. And that's important. We talked about contract types. And I always remember we used to do work for Kmart years and years ago before they went bankrupt. And so Kmart would call and they'd call me and they would want like 10 carpenters for 3 months, right? And it would be renovations in a store, and it would be late work. And so what happens was the facilities manager called me in one day, and this is years ago, and shows me this video, and it's my crew, and they're on break. Well, he does the time lapse with the photography, and they took like a 35-minute break. They're only supposed to take a 15-minute break, right? So he took a 35-minute break. They're caught on the video doing that. He didn't want any of that crew back. So what am I going to do? I got to put that crew somewhere else. I got to use a different crew on the site, right? Video recordings, because it was cost plus. So they're being charged on what productivity they're doing. They're only supposed to take a 15-minute break. You don't get that on lump sum. See, that's the difference. I always felt pressure when it was cost plus because the client's all of a sudden really looking at how long things take. If things taking longer for me and our crews and it's lump sum, well, it's my responsibility to deal with my crews, but I don't have to worry about the client getting so upset with that as long as I'm meeting the target time frames. So just differences in how projects are managed and some of the things that go on. But you can imagine 25 years ago what the quality of the video recordings was compared to today what the quality of the video recordings is. So time-lapse photography, it all fits in that sort of same process there. So that's what I really wanted to get across to you in lecture 4A is the importance of the documentation, understanding where you can take advantage of it, utilize it to your benefits. And then that data, as long as it's easily accessible, will help you to run your projects and manage your projects and better understand what's going on exactly. So collecting the right data in the right way is important, and journaling what your daily activities, what's going on in the project, and having that record of it so that you can always go back to it when something comes up later on and you can look back, where was that? I remember, and then you look in your journal and you can check that out. So yeah, this is a bound journal, but as I said, if I was a company today, there is no way I'd be okay if somebody wants to write in here first and then they want to transcribe it into the productivity software. But personally, I'm into dynamic systems, not static systems. Static is I enter it into this and then I got to enter it into that. Who wants to really do that? I like it when you enter it once and then it's into the system. And if I need to access it for different bits of information, it's easily searchable and retrievable. So, Tom Stephenson, I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll be back with lecture 4B, which I think is really interesting when we start talking about meetings and how to run an effective meeting. How many times I see poorly run meetings, and it makes me crazy sometimes. So we'll have that discussion, and in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next